The FX3 has had a firmware update, but don't get too excited. Today I want to talk to you about the new firmware update for the Sony FX3. Now there have been plenty of videos already uploaded to YouTube talking about the updates, the added features they've included, running through things, how you set it up, how you do the update. So I'm not going to do any of that. Instead, I'm talking about the features that are still missing from this camera and also perhaps some of the limitations of the update itself as well. Now, I don't want to be a downer because it is absolutely awesome that Sony are still updating this camera even after 2 years and adding new features that perhaps maybe should have been there from the start, but it's good to see they finally have arrived. That said, I think it's fair to say there's a lot of features that really should be there. Features that should have been from day one that they haven't included and easily could have been added in a firmware update. And also features that are appearing on other Sony cameras that have been released since that once again should be featured on a camera like the FX3. The first thing that people are very excited about this 3.0 update is the fact that it now has DCI 4K inside the FX3. This is very cool that they finally have added it. Once again, should have been there from the start, but I don't think you should get too excited about it for two particular reasons. First up, you're not actually gaining any extra field of view or any extra real estate on the side of the image. This is probably one of the main advantages of shooting DCI 4K versus shooting UHD, is the fact that the image is slightly wider. It's 17:9 rather than 16:9. However, because the FX3 was already oversampling the sensor and downscaling it to a UHD image, the image is actually the same width whether you're shooting UHD or DCI 4K. The other thing to note is the fact that the DCI 4K is limited to the all-eye codec, and that is quite frustrating. As I've done a video in the past talking about which codecs you should be using, I wasn't necessarily a big fan of the all-eye codec. I don't think it's really that required. I think especially now with M1 Max and things like that, you can certainly shoot in the other formats, save space, and arguably get better quality. DSqueeze is slightly more limited as well. Okay, it's not something that really anyone was asking. It's a very simple feature that's been added to pretty much every monitor that's out there. So most people have had a workaround for this anyway. But it is nice to include it inside the camera. And you know, a cinema camera should have options like DSqueeze as standard. Unfortunately though, it is limited to just 1.3 or 2 times squeeze. So if you have say a 1.6 or a 1.8 lens, which is quite common nowadays, unfortunately, they're not included on the list. Unfortunately, one thing that a lot of people have been asking for but that Sony didn't add to the FX3 is the ability to shoot either 25p or 30p in the HS format. As I mentioned earlier with the new MacBook Pros, I think we want to be shooting in more compressed codecs now. It just makes sense. It makes much more sense for extra quality, smaller file sizes. It's really annoying we can't shoot in normal formats in XAVC HS. It does feel like this would be an easy thing to add, an easy win for Sony, and something that would make their users really happy, but unfortunately it's still not there. Speaking of easy things to add and something that should have been there from day one is the lack of shutter angle, and we still don't have it. Everyone has been requesting this. Lots of people have been asking for a lot of the features that have been added, things like the DCI, things like the true 24p, but I think without doubt the one feature that every single person that has an FX3 wanted in their camera in an update, and it seemed like the smallest and simplest update to do, was the ability to use shutter angle over shutter speed. The reason shutter angle is so important to have for these cameras is just so that when you switch to different modes, going from 25p up to 50 or 60 or whatever, you're always guaranteed to have the correct shutter angle. So it's going to go straight to 1/50th or 1/100th depending on the frame rate that you're choosing. Other cinema features that really should have been included in the camera from day one, and certainly by now in version 3, are things like false color and waveform. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand false color probably is never going to come because they don't even have it in the FX6. It just seems to be something that Sony really isn't that interested in. But I think a waveform is something that should be expected and they could have included in the FX3, certainly at this stage with the updates. Finally, two other things that I think could have been included in this update, but perhaps would have been quite unrealistic and not expected, but it would have been a nice surprise, It's a shame we haven't seen an update with the autofocus so it can do animal eye autofocus. Philip Bloom has been a big pusher of this because obviously he's got plenty of cats. The A7 IV, which I'm shooting this video on right now, has it included. So it's certainly a feature that Sony have had included on their cameras for a little while. And I think surely in the software that they have available to them, they could have been adding this to the FX3. Something that would have been very exciting to include would have been adding open gate to this camera. And to be honest, I don't think this was ever realistic. It's a thing that like Panasonic and Fujifilm might do, but for a company of Sony size, I think they like to play it quite conservative and they wouldn't give you all those extra features like that. We're not even seeing that in their much higher end cameras like the FX6, so I don't think we can expect that in the FX3 anytime soon. That said, I think adding it would have been a big statement. It would have shown that they would truly understand the need for doing different types of shooting nowadays, being able to use that full sensor that is right there in the camera, and it's a shame we can't utilize it. It could be a limitation of the processor, perhaps be able to record that entire sensor in say 5 or 6K, whatever it may be, is just not possible. Maybe it's just pushing the camera too far. But hopefully maybe in a version 2 of the FX3, the Mark II, when it comes out eventually, maybe NAB, maybe very soon, hopefully that will be the thing that they will add in that camera. So there you go, that is what's still missing from the FX3. I don't think we'll probably be seeing any of them added now into the FX3 moving forward. Unfortunately, I think this will probably be the last update that we get from it. Don't get me wrong, it's awesome that Sony have been adding all these extra features over the years, and even now, 2 years on, we're still getting some really nice updates to the camera, even if a lot of those features are things that should have been in there from day one. Let me know what you think is missing from this update. What would you have liked to seen? And do you think this update was good enough from Sony, or do you think there are features that really should be still in there? If you enjoyed this video, make sure you check out my other videos where I talk plenty about the FX3 and other Sony cameras, including which codec you should be using.